Welcome to another edition of the Press Box Podcast. I am your host, Ralph Miranda. I'll be joined later on by our producer, Nathan Miranda. Today on the Press Box Podcast, we're going to wrap up the college football season, talk a little bit about the college football 12-team playoff, talk a little bit about some of the ramifications of that playoff to college football teams, as well as some ways that they can tweak the system going into next year to make it a little more competitive, if you will, and a little bit more fair. And we'll also talk about the NFL, the conference championship games coming up. We'll preview the Super Bowl a little bit. We'll talk more about officiating and how they can improve that. So all that and more on this week's edition of the Press Box Podcast. Remember to join us on Twitter, formerly Twitter, now X, at PressBoxPod, Instagram at PressBoxPod, and the Press Box Podcast channel on YouTube. So without further ado, the Press Box Podcast. Okay, welcome back to the Press Box Podcast. This is episode number 163. I'm your co-host, Ralph Miranda. I'm joined today by our producer, Nathan Miranda. And we are kind of in a little bit of a lull, football-wise anyway, right now. The college football playoffs concluded roughly about 2 weeks ago with the Ohio State Buckeyes defeating Notre Dame 34-23 in the national championship game. We had our National Football League Conference Championship games last Sunday, and now we're in that week between the Conference Championship games and the Super Bowl. So we have a little bit to talk about as far as the college football playoffs, how they concluded, maybe some tweaks to the system going into next year. We'll talk a little bit about the NFL playoffs as well as we get ready for Super Bowl number 59, which will be decided between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles. Chiefs looking for a three-peat. It will be the first time in the history of National Football League that a team has won 3 straight Super Bowls. The Green Bay Packers won 3 NFL championships in a row, but that was pre-Super Bowl era, pre-merger era. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about just general football stuff, a little bit about the Giants, even though I know that's music for another podcast, but I want to talk a little bit about what makes certain teams great and what makes certain teams unable to get their act together. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So the college football playoff, we talked a little bit about our last podcast. We talked about previewed the championship game coming up. So we've talked a lot about how it kind of played out. But what I want to talk about today is I want to take a look at the two polls. Now remember, the way the college football playoff was set up this year was your top 4 highest ranked conference champions got the byes. In other words, they got a bye into the quarterfinals, and then the other 8 teams were seeded appropriately and played each other with games being played at the home site of the higher seeded team. So the way that played out, your 4 conference champions that got the byes were Oregon, who won the Big Ten championship, Georgia, who won the Southeastern Conference championship, Boise State won the Mountain West Conference championship, and Arizona State, who won the Big 12 Conference championship. And interestingly enough, all 4 of those teams lost their first game in the quarterfinals. Arizona State, albeit a valiant effort against Texas, were defeated by the Longhorns. Boise State pretty well got manhandled by Penn State. Oregon was just demoralized by Ohio State. And Notre Dame pretty much shut down Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. So it was interesting the way it played out, which I'm sure a lot of the talking heads on TV and on paper have talked a lot since then and did during the playoff about tweaking the system. How will the system be tweaked going into next year? And I think that even those people who put together the playoff knew that there was going to be some tweaking, right? I mean, you have to, because you don't know how a format is going to play out. You can put it down on paper and say this is a good format for us, but you really don't know how it's going to play out until it actually gets played. So I think the number one tweak that I think has to be made is you have to get rid of the automatic bye for conference champions. I think that has to go away because really, when you look at the rankings, okay, let's look at the rankings. These were the rankings of the teams going into the playoff. Okay, in other words, the final ranking when the playoff seedings were announced. Oregon was number 1, Georgia was number 2, Texas was 3, Penn State was 4, Notre Dame was 5, Ohio State was 6, Tennessee was 7, Indiana was 8, Boise State was 9, SMU was 10, Alabama was 11, Arizona State was 12, and then you had Miami at 13, Ole Miss at 14, South Carolina 15, Clemson was 16th, BYU was 17th, and then after that, Iowa State, Missouri, Illinois. We won't even go any farther than that because it really didn't matter after that. But the point being, of the top 12 teams that were ranked in that final poll, 11 of them made the playoff, except Alabama. All right. The team that got in ahead of Alabama was obviously Clemson because Clemson won the ACC by beating SMU. SMU, I think, was ranked 7th, if I'm not mistaken, before that ACC championship game. So the question then is, now I'm not arguing that Alabama should have been in, all right? But what I'm saying is if you take away the automatic buys for the conference champions, then you would have had Alabama in instead of Clemson. But the difference is you would have had a different seeding setup, right? Because Oregon would have been the number 1 seed, and they should have ended up playing Arizona State. Arizona State was the 12th seed, right? In fact, I would say you don't even need buys. But if you want to use buys, okay, then your top teams that got the buys should have been Oregon, Georgia, Texas, and Penn State instead of Oregon, Georgia, Arizona State, and Boise State. So those would have been your top buys. And then you would have had Notre Dame at number 5 playing Arizona State, Ohio State at 6 playing Alabama. You would have had Tennessee at 7 playing SMU and Indiana at 8 playing Boise State. So I think that would have been a little bit more realistic going into this thing. Now, it would have been tremendously different. I mean, Notre Dame would have still had a home game. Instead of Indiana, they would have played Arizona State. You could argue that the game would have turned out the same way. Maybe not, okay? Ohio State would have played Alabama. Now, that's one that could have turned out differently. I'm not saying that Tennessee was not a good opponent for Ohio State, but who knows? I mean, Alabama might have been a better opponent for them. Tennessee would have had a home game instead of traveling to Ohio State, and they would have hosted SMU, a team that I think they probably could have beaten. And Indiana would have had a home game, and they would have played Boise State. And then those teams would have slotted into those teams with the bye. So I think that's one thing to look at right there is getting rid of those automatic buys for conference champions. And I think that would make for – because otherwise, what's the purpose of having this poll? Because if you look at this poll right here, I mean, it really didn't make a whole lot of sense. Boise State's ranked 9th, and they ended up getting a seed and a week off. And then the same with Clemson didn't get the week off, but Arizona State did, and they were ranked 12th. So why should a team like Notre Dame or Ohio State or Tennessee have to play the first week over Arizona State when Arizona State won a conference championship, and you could argue not even a strong conference championship? So I think that's something that needs to be looked at. And then if you look at the final rankings of the season, this was after the playoff was concluded. Ohio State obviously was number 1. They had all 56 first-place votes. Notre Dame was number 2. Oregon was 3. Texas was 4. Penn State 5. Georgia 6. Arizona State 7. Boise State 8. Tennessee 9th. Indiana 10th. Ole Miss 11th. SMU 12th. BYU 13th. Clemson 14th. So forth and so on down the line. So that's kind of my number one thing. And Nathan, I want to ask you what your thoughts on that are. I mean, I know you kind of probably agree with me somewhat, but maybe you have some insight looking at it a little bit a different way.
I agree with you. I don't know if they have to have buys like you said, but if you want to have buys, like we've said many times, you have to rank the teams like they rank them at the end of the season and not reseed it based on winning a conference, even if that's like, like a lower quality conference. Because that's when you get into the problems. Is if you put emphasis on winning any your conference, no matter what the conference is, within a lot of these conferences are a lot weaker. It's not like the NFC East versus the AFC West. Like all the divisions of the NFL are pretty equal.
Right.
I mean, probably some are better than others, but my point is that the competition's relatively equal. In college, what's the MAC-10? What's that conference called?
The Mountain West?
The Mountain West,
yeah,
whatever.
That's the Boise State one.
Yeah, it's not the same as the SEC. So, by a long shot. So, you can't give those teams buys. I mean, if you want to give conference champion buys, you have to limit it to a couple conferences. But I'm with you. Either don't give buys or just the best case is, like you said, just rank them based on how, like they do at the end of the season, like the AP ranking or something like that. You know what I mean? And then just don't reseed them for the playoffs. Just send them into the playoffs, see it as they're ranked, at the end of the year. So I don't know. I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of how you. Yeah, let me step back. If you take away the bye, first of all, I don't think you need a bye. Okay, I understand why you give teams a bye. Don't get me wrong. Okay, but your 4 bye teams were waiting in the major bowls, right? Georgia was waiting in the Sugar Bowl. Boise State was waiting in the Fiesta Bowl. Arizona State was waiting in the Peach Bowl, and Oregon was waiting in the Rose Bowl. Okay, but you can still. All 12 teams can play on week 1, and then you can take those 8 winners and put them in those bowls next week. Okay, if you did that, let's look at.
You'd have to have more teams if you didn't want to do buys, though, right? You'd have to have more teams.
That's right, because you've got
which is fine.
Which is fine. Which I think they're planning on doing. I think they're actually thinking about. I don't know if they're thinking or it's a done deal going to 16 teams. Okay, and if you do 16, you don't need buys. Yeah, you just still had to have buys. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. So, yeah, no question. But I mean, you could go to 16 teams and do it as well. But one thing I wanted to bring out, which I thought was rather interesting, and let me see if I can find it real quickly here. One of the big concerns going into this year when the final rankings came out and so forth and so on was the strength of schedule, right? In other words, and you've brought this up a few times when we talked about it. How do you rank a Boise State team, okay, that was 12-1? Granted, their only loss was to Oregon, but their opponents were not that strong, okay? How do you rank an Arizona State team in the same situation, or an SMU team? You look at Indiana. Indiana lost 1 game to Ohio State, but the Big Ten was not. They didn't have to play Oregon. They didn't have to play Penn State. So how do you do that? So one of the things that a number of people did, which I took a look at, was if you remember the old BCS way back in 1998, they finally decided, hey, let's do away with a final poll that names a national champion, and let's have some sort of playoff. And if you remember, the BCS was a computer system that took into account the 2 polls at the time, the coaches poll and the Associated Press poll, but also factored those rankings in with a number of other rankings: strength of schedule, home and away, offensive, defensive, whatever. All right. And then it would spit out your rankings based on that. So if you looked at this year's teams, and you compared them using the BCS, okay? So let me get to these final rankings here. Okay, so if you use the BCS system to rank this year's teams, Oregon would have been number 1, Texas would have been number 2, Notre Dame would have been 3, Penn State was 4, Georgia 5, Ohio State 6, SMU 7, Tennessee 8, Indiana 9, Boise State 10, Alabama 11, South Carolina 12. All right. So using that system, which takes into account strength of schedule, right? Takes into account all those factors that were thrown out as reasons why you shouldn't keep one team in or keep one team out. All right. Then your teams with byes would have been Oregon, Texas, Notre Dame, and Penn State. And then you'd have had Georgia would have played South Carolina. That would have been an interesting game. You'd have had Ohio State playing Alabama. That would have been an interesting game. You would have had SMU playing Boise State. Really a perfect game, right? Two teams that are probably in similar type situations, okay? And then you would have had Indiana playing Tennessee. I think that would have been a really good playoff system, okay? And then those winners would have gone in to meet those teams that had to bye. So there's got to be that to me, that's the best way to tweak this thing. I know you got to keep byes in the situation until you get to 16 teams. But you could do away with the automatic conference championship bye, go to a BCS format, rank your top teams based on that, and then give out your byes and give out your playoff.
Yeah, that's the best way. That's the best way to sum it up. I think just the BCS they had before they started doing the playoff system. First playoff year was what,
the first
14 playoff they started.
2014.
So before that was all BCS stuff. Go back to that system, but now just take
12 teams.
12 teams, put in the playoff. So, whereas before they were just taking the top two and playing them off in the national championship game.
Right.
So I don't know why they overthought themselves. They tried to put too many little like intricate like little details and rules that they outthought themselves.
They did. I mean, they did it, and I'm not advocating. Trust me now. I want people to understand this. I'm not saying that any of the teams that got in this year did not deserve to get in. Okay, they all deserve to be in there based on the format. So I don't want to hear from people. Well, Alabama should have been in. If Alabama should have been in, they shouldn't have lost 4 games or 3 games, and then they should have turned around and lost to Michigan in a bowl game. So I'm not. The 12 teams that made it deserve to be there based on the format, but the seeding system was not properly done, and you ended up with poor matchups. Okay.
When they had the 14 playoff, were they just using the BCS and taking the top 4 teams?
No, there was no BCS. It was just a ranking like this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
But they didn't do any type of reseeding in it. Like at the end of the year, whatever the ranking was, they just took the top 4. Whereas now at the end of the season, they had the rankings and then they reseeded them.
Correct.
So it's kind of what they were doing. I know it wasn't the BCS; it was a committee ranking, but they weren't doing any reseeding for those 4 teams.
Right.
They weren't taking like the 3rd team, making them the first seed because they won a conference.
Right. But you don't. But see, here's the thing.
BCS is gone now. They don't even do a ranking anymore.
No, they don't. But see, the thing is, it's all politics, right? I mean, it's like, I used to listen to Rush Limbaugh a lot. He's been passed away for a while. But his famous line that I'll never forget was, if you want to figure something out, follow the money trail, okay? And I think it's the same in college football, is that why do we need a committee? Well, because ESPN's running this playoff thing, and they want it set up the way they want it, okay? And nobody's going to tell me any different that this committee is not somewhat biased. Anytime you get people involved, that's why the BCS was really a neat concept, because it used the 2 polls, but those were only 2 factors in the whole system, okay? So you did have a human element, but it was not the only element. We don't need a committee. If you take the BCS, like I just said, and you rank it based on that format, you don't need a committee. Just these are the 12 teams, okay? And you really don't even need to reseed them because they're basically ranked on that system.
The rankings on that system. At the end of the year, you just take the final rankings and you put them in the playoffs.
Exactly, but we have to have a committee. Why
And there's no confusion amongst fans as you get down to the wire the last couple of weeks of the year. If you're following your team, like they're ranked 8th now, they're ranked 7th. When the season were in right then, they're going to be the 7th seed. You know who they're going to play.
Right.
Whereas this year, you were watching that, you had to remember, well, they might be ranked 7th, but really, if the season ended, they'd be ranked 3rd because if they win their conference. But like it was too much figuring for fans.
Right.
Of what might happen.
Right. Exactly. And that's why I think I think it needs to be changed. So enough of that. We'll talk some more about that as we get closer to college football again. And I do want to mention one other thing too, Nathan. And you played football, high school and college football. I did as well, and I played it back when you only played 10 games in a bowl game. Notre Dame played 16 games. Ohio State played 16 games. If Ohio State would have won if Ohio State would have played in the Big Ten championship, they would have played 17 games. Okay, that's an NFL schedule. I mean, these guys are not NFL players. They're not. Their whole lot. I mean, that's a whole other argument. Are they student athletes or not? But they are. They still do have to go to class, whether they take it seriously or not. They still have to take exams and all that stuff. In the NFL, all you're doing is playing football. Every day of the week is football, 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 football. You're at the facility all day. And I would still argue that 17 games is a lot to play for the NFL guys. So, these are too many games for these guys. Now, either you're going to have to go from 12 regular season back down to 10, which will chop off a couple of those playoff games, or that's the only way you could do it, really. Or you're going to have to take away maybe I think a lot of teams now have 2 byes. Take away one of those byes, and then give everybody 3 weeks off at the end of the season before they have to start this tournament. Because that's a lot of games.
I'll say the NFL now everybody plays 17 games before the playoffs, so they still play more. The teams you were saying in college that play 17, if they got all the way to the championship.
Right.
If you didn't make the playoffs, you only played what in college?
12.
12. So I mean, it's not the exact same as the NFL, but it still needs to be taken down a notch in college because their schedules are not like they're not professional players.
Well, that's right.
So make it 10. I think 10's perfect. I remember growing up like early 2000s. Didn't they all play 10 games?
Yeah.
Make it 10. Some teams might play 11, but everybody needs to play the same schedule too. Number of games.
Right.
You can't have some. I don't know if it's like this now, but I remember some teams used to always play one extra game than another team.
Right.
Everybody played 10 games. Or, like you said, if you want to keep adding more playoff rounds and all this stuff, then it NIL things getting bigger. Then you need to just turn them into professional athletes. There needs to be two tracks in college, there's in high school. I don't know if it's still like this. I remember in high school there was always like a college. I'm talking academics, not sports. There was always like a college. I don't know what they called it, but like a college track of courses and classes, and then like a trade type.
Right.
And of course, if you took like the trade type track, you wouldn't be required to take the same type of stuff, like whatever AP stuff,
right?
Or whatever it was. Same thing in college. They're paying guys now. That's just going to get bigger. They need to say, okay, you want to come play for Ohio State? Do you want to be a student athlete? Right? You're not going to be able to earn as much money probably, or this or that. You're going to have to go to classes all the time, but you're going to be on path to earn a degree. Or do you want to just be an athlete? You have no ties to Ohio State academically at the school. You're just getting paid to play here.
Right.
And then most guys would choose that, obviously. But you still have guys who maybe they just want to go to school at Ohio State. They want to play football while they're there, so they do the student athlete track. Those are the type of guys that aren't going to get NIL money anyways.
Right.
Guys that don't play,
Right.
Which is fine. They can still have student athletes in that sense. But the guys that are getting paid to play, they're just don't make them go to classes. That's ridiculous. Then if something happens, if they have a career in the injury, whatever, then they can enroll in the school if they want to.
Right.
They don't have enough money to do that now. They got paid. The only weird thing, I don't know how the school would like this, but they'd have to still be allowed to have some type of on-campus housing for them, be able to use a lot of these teams probably have their own cafeterias, maybe even dorms. I don't know, but they'd stuff use the campus amenities,
right?
Even though they're not a student,
right?
I don't know.
Well, it could be worked out. I do think though that maybe here's another thing that your point was well taken about the fact that most teams are just playing 12 games. They're not playing 17. And the same in the NFL, right?
It's not a true NFL schedule.
Yeah,
the schedule would be they played 17 regular season games.
Yeah, but in the NFL, everybody plays 17, and some play 20 if they get to the Super Bowl. Some play, 19 if they get beat earlier. My point is, they're all right around that 17 to 20 games. Okay, there's a big disparity in college football, right? You got some play 12, some play 17, 16 or 17. Okay, Now that's one thing. The second thing is with NIL and the portal, and remember, college football's got spring practice. You got guys that are freshmen that need to develop. That's what you use spring practice for. You don't need that in the NFL, right? Everybody that's on your team is developed, right? Yeah. So there's no spring practice. The other thing is there's free agency in college football now with the portal. There's free agency in the NFL, but the free agency in the NFL has a system, right? You can't start until March 15th. Then the free agency portal, if you will, opens up and everybody starts signing players, but then it closes and that's it. And when you sign those players, they're under a contract. They can't come to you for 6 games and say, I don't like the way things are going. I'm going to go somewhere else next year. So my point being that, and it goes along with your thing about, a college track or a trade track, is you need a commissioner of college football. You need a governing body, not the NCAA, but one big body that puts into place regulations like the NFL. Meaning, the portal opens up here. If you go in the portal, you have to commit to 2 years. Some kind of system that levels the playing field, if you will, okay? Because right now, you take Ohio State and Notre Dame, all right? Here we are, February 2nd. Notre Dame had probably 6 or 7 players go into the portal after the championship game. Ohio State had some too. Well, now you've got spring practice that's going to start here in probably another month, and you've got to figure out what you're going to do. Whereas, you didn't have that problem before. So there's got to be some regulated system of how to handle free agency, how to handle the NIL, so that everybody's on the same page, and you can't go get a guy and him leave in 6 weeks. Okay, I mean, there's got to be a system to that. So we'll leave it at that. All right, let's move on to the NFL. Super Bowl is set. The Chiefs against the Eagles. A rematch of a Super Bowl from just 2 years ago when the Chiefs beat the Eagles in Super Bowl 57. The Chiefs are trying to do something that's never been done before, trying to three-peat. Okay, we talked about there's only been 3 teams, right, that have had a chance to three-peat. Okay, but they didn't do it. The Dolphins, the Patriots, and who was the other one? Do you remember?
Bills.
The Bills, right.
Chance being that they were in a Super Bowl game.
3 years in a row. Right. So the Chiefs...
I'm sorry. They had won 2 Super Bowls back-to-back, and they were in their 3rd Super Bowl.
Correct. So the Bills wouldn't have been that.
So
one
the
of
Bills
them.
would have been
No,
those.
it was...
But I think the way the trivia question was they were just in 3 in a row, right? But that's not really a chance to three-peat if you didn't win the first.
No, it was teams that had a chance to three-peat,
so
I
the Bills
think.
weren't one of them.
I don't think they were, yeah. I know it was the Dolphins. They had a chance to do it.
I forget what the question with the parameters were.
Yeah, I forget the parameters questions anyway. I know it was the Bills. 3 teams that had gone to 3 Super Bowls in a row.
No matter what.
Right.
Bills have done that.
Bills, Patriots, Dolphins. Right. Now the Chiefs become the 4th team that have done that, and they have a chance to be the first to win 3 in a row. So there we go. Now, there's been a lot of controversy as of late about officiating. We talked a little bit about this. First of all, I don't think there's some sort of conspiracy going on. But it's also very, very conceivable that the NFL could be trying to adjust these games and have outcomes of these games go a certain way. I don't think it's anybody outside of the NFL. I don't think there's like gambling people that have gotten to the referees. I think that's ridiculous. Okay.
Is that what you mean by conspiracy?
Yeah. But who knows, right? Now, the other thing I'll say, one of the big question marks in that game against the Bills, the AFC Championship, and I watched these plays. The Bills it wasn't their very last drive. It was the drive. The game was tied, and they ended up turning the ball over to the Chiefs. The Chiefs drove down and scored to go ahead by 7. So the game was tied at the time. All right, or maybe either way, it was close. The 1-pointer tie. They had a 3rd and 3. They threw a little pass out to their tight end. He made the first down. He lunged for the first down before his knees ever touched the ground, and the ball crossed the line, and the referee spotted him short. Well, then they tried a quarterback sneak, and you could argue that they probably shouldn't have tried it because the Chiefs had it figured out. They stopped him on the goal line once. But he did make the first down, all right? Now, then you brings into the question, well, when did the whistle blow? Well, that, again, could be something that could be manipulated, right? You could say, blow the whistle quicker, all right? But my point is, you've got technology now that can zero in to see if a receiver's toe touched the white part of the sideline. You can actually get so close to see it, okay? You can see certain things like, did a guy make a catch? I mean, so why can't we have some sort of use that technology to determine if a ball crossed the plane or not? There's got to be a way to do that, okay?
I saw something. I don't know if the refs, you think, have access to this. I don't think I've ever seen it on TV, but I saw like on Instagram somebody mocked it. I don't know if it was just some individual mocked this up, if it was some type of official thing that came down from the NFL or what, but it had like a white line drawn where the first down line was, like in 3-dimensional space, kind of, like above, like in the air,
right,
and from different angles,
right,
and you can see the ball crosses over. Now, I've never seen that type of thing on TV. They've never showed us that,
right.
So I'm not sure if, but there has to be something like that they have access to if they wanted to. Usually, you said that in a game with this much technology nowadays, they can't figure that out.
They can figure it out. They just don't want to figure it out. Okay, and the thing is, and I understand is, go back to baseball, right? I mean, the biggest complaint in baseball has always been umpires have too much control, right? They call balls and strikes. Every umpire is different. Well, they finally put replay in baseball, right? Now you can challenge a play in baseball, okay?
Can you challenge a ball and strike
you can't.
in the Major League Baseball?
You can't do it in the Major Leagues. But
in minors, like on weekends or something.
Right, but you can challenge plays in baseball.
That's coming, though, probably.
It's coming. That's exactly right.
Automated strikes is coming, too.
Right. So that's the reason why the NFL fights this, because the referees don't want to feel like they're being second-guessed on everything. But
that's not going to feel like they're useless.
Exactly. That's true, too. But then here's another factor that most people don't understand, I think. 50 years ago, 50 years ago I was playing. So 50 years ago or even farther back than that, players were not as big. They weren't as fast as they are today. So officials could keep up with them, all right? Today, officials, I don't care how much kind of shape they're in, an official can't run down the field to look at a pass to see if there was pass interference, okay? And then don't tell me that the back judge standing way back in the end zone can tell if that was pass interference. He may be standing still, but he's so far away from that. So there's got to be some sort of a system for that, okay? And then using the line I just mentioned about the speed, right now you have officials standing on the sideline at the first down marker, and they're watching the play. And then as they see it develop, they're running in to spot the ball. Well, how do you know from the time you think you saw something to the time you start running where that ball ends up, okay? So my point is something's got to be done. I did see where, if you remember back when the Texans and the Chiefs played in the first round of the playoffs, they called an egregious roughing the passer penalty or personal foul on the Texans, Two guys had come to hit Mahomes when he was sliding, and basically their helmets hit each other. But one of the Texans' helmets grazed Mahomes' helmet. Grazed it. All right. And they called a penalty. I did see where they're going to discuss at the competition committee in March, making that a reviewable play, which I think they should do. Because if you review that, you can obviously see that shouldn't be a penalty. All right. And that shows you that they're seeing that this is egregious.
They're making any type of blow to the head penalty?
When the quarterback slides.
Oh, just that specific type of thing?
Yes, just when the quarterback
Not
slides.
if he's in the pocket and your hand hits his head.
No, because the referee's standing right there. He should be able to see that, right?
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's what they're saying, okay? And, and another thing I don't like about football, we've talked about this, NFL especially, is why are there less penalties in the playoffs than there are in the regular season? If you're going to let these guys play in the playoffs, let them play in the regular season, okay? Because what you're doing is you're changing the parameters of the game, and that's not good. Okay.
I'm in favor of. First of all, I think even the playoff officiating is they go too far with penalties. But if you had to pick one or the other, I'm in favor of the way they officiate in the playoffs, the less penalties. Mm-hmm. But like you said, I would rather them just be consistent one way or the other. Either consistently call it bad like you do in the regular season, or consistently call it stricter like you do in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. I agree with that completely. You can't. I've heard some arguments like, in the playoffs, that when you get down to like championship games, playoff games, they have to be one more on your own or something. But like, but regular season games don't matter then. You know what I mean? Like they're gonna have more of an effect on regular season games. It doesn't make. You have to be consistent. So one way or the other.
Right, you do. You have
pick
to
pick a way. And I would recommend you pick the way where you're more lenient with penalties. But wherever you pick, be consistent.
I think you should be lenient on penalties. Okay, I mean, I think that
It's almost like they realize they need to be. That's why they do it in the playoffs. But for whatever reason, in the regular season, they don't care.
Right. And I think some kind of rules have to be put in place for the quarterback where if he's going to run the football, this may be just a personal peeve of mine, but nothing bothers me more than to see a quarterback like Jalen Hurts. He'll run the ball at the drop of a hat, and then he'll slide. Okay. Well, that's not fair to a defense. What do you do in that situation?
It's very hard.
It's very hard. Even if you know he's going to run and you start closing on him, he's going to slide. Okay, so how do you defend that?
It's so hard to do. It's hard for any quarterback, but it's not as hard for somebody like if Peyton Manning was scrambling, which you never would do.
Right.
But It's a little easier to play that because he's Peyton Manning.
Right.
But nowadays, you don't really have Peyton Manning types anymore. They're all pretty mobile now, the quarterbacks. And like you said, it's very hard. If you think, okay, well, he's definitely going to slide, and you play it that way. Well, if he doesn't slide and try to put some move on each other, then you're going to look like a fool, right?
Right.
And he's going to get a lot of yards. So you can't do that, right? You can't give up a big play, right?
Right.
So if you presume as you pursue the other ball carrier, not expecting him to slide, but then when he does slide, it's almost impossible to hold up on him, right? Because unless he slides really early, which most of the time they don't do that. They slide last minute most of the time. It's ridiculous. Same with going out of bounds. Like if he's running the side, you assume he's going to step out of bounds. But if you assume that and he doesn't, he's going to put a move on you and get up the field. You can't assume that. If you don't assume it, and you presume like you would if he was in the middle of the field or like any ball carrier, and then he steps out of bounds, it's hard to hold up, and you might hit him and throw a flag.
Right. I just don't like it. I mean, if a quarterback, and another thing I don't like too is you got the sliding factor. Well, then let's say the quarterback runs and he heads to the sidelines, and he's right on the sideline, okay, and he's trying to get that extra yard. Right before with the ball, and then he steps out of bounds. Well, a defender's coming full speed. He's supposed to like stop there. I mean, it can't happen. And then all that quarterback has to do is have 1 foot out of bounds, bang, and they're going to hit you with a penalty. Yeah. But they don't do it if you hit a running back.
He'll just fall down if anything. If he needs to, it looks bad, and they throw a penalty.
And listen, and I understand completely why they're doing this. Right, the quarterbacks are well.
I mean, I get it, but I don't agree with it.
Maybe I should. I don't agree with it. I understand what they're doing. Their answer to that will be the quarterbacks are the most visible guys on the team. And if a team loses a Josh Allen or a Patrick Mahomes or so-and-so by injury, that team's fortunes have changed tremendously. Well, that's football, okay? That's football. If the quarterback's going to run, now I don't have a problem with them protecting him in the pocket. If he's standing in the pocket and he's looking to throw, and he releases that ball, and you hit him in the head, I have no problem with that penalty, okay? Right now.
Okay.
What I mean by right now is in today's world, okay? Today's world, okay? But even that has to be somewhat regulated properly, okay? But other than that, if he's going to run, he needs to be a football player. He
needs to be like once you cross the line of scrimmage, he needs to be like any other ball carrier.
I agree.
Now, theoretically, a running back could give himself up and slide or fall down, but he'd have to be touched still.
He still has to be touched.
Even if he goes down feet first, he has to be touched.
That's right.
Now, it's still, if a running back were to try to like run out the clock and not score and slide, if somebody still drills him, they'll probably throw a penalty.
If they drill him, they will. But then you can hit him, and they're not going to throw.
You can hit him. That's the point. And it needs to be like that for quarterbacks. They need to know once they cross the line of scrimmage, they're live. They're live.
I agree.
Like running back. Then see. I mean, that would change the way a lot of these quarterbacks play. Obviously,
sure it would.
Know that, but that's fine. They either take the hits if you want to take the hits or don't.
Exactly.
But I don't understand. The quarterbacks have always been. I understand we can get into this, but the quarterbacks have always been the biggest stars on the team. Right? Terry Bradshaw was probably the biggest star of the 70s Steelers, right? Or at least the face of the franchise. Joe Montana was the face of the 49ers and the West Coast offense. They've always been the face of the franchise and the biggest stars. Yeah, they didn't seem to care too much when people were taking Terry Bradshaw and like power bombing him into the ground, right? They didn't seem to care too much when the Giants were putting all these hits on Montana. It looked like they're going to end his career or something. But I think now, obviously, I think they care more because then if they lose a guy like that, yeah, they just lost the face of the franchise or whatever. But the game was not as much entertainment as it is now. Now they're afraid if they lose that face of the franchise, the viewership might drop off more. They lose,
the gambling. Gambling's a big part of it.
Gambling's a big part of it now, especially now the NFL's like promoting it too. There's always gambling in the NFL, but now the NFL is like actively promoting it. They have like their official gambling apps. So they don't want to. That's probably bigger than anything else. Actually,
I agree with you. That's probably the biggest driving factor.
Yeah, but I also feel like it's becoming more like WWE now. The NFL.
It is.
You know what I mean? Like
it is
fake contact entertainment type of thing.
It is. Yeah.
So if you lose your star in WWE, that doesn't help anybody. You know
right.
What I mean? Like in other words, WWE is not about like who wins the matches and like it's not about the sport. It's about like viewership and fans and entertainment and engagement. And then NFL's becoming more like that too. So if you lose your star it hurts all that. You know what I mean?
I agree with you.
Would you agree with that? Because it's not like all of a sudden QBs have become more popular than they were in the 70s. They were always the most Joe Manning. They're always the most popular parts of their team. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
They just didn't seem to care as much as they went out, I guess.
That's that's
they care more. They I guess they still favor them more than any other position in the field back then. I would say probably. Would you agree with that?
Maybe
it's just that they didn't favor any other position very highly, anyways, to begin with. So
right. You didn't have a lot of running quarterbacks back then either.
The proportion I wish they favored QBs may have been the same, but everything was brought down like 10 notches as far as how much they favored.
Well, and I would say that you hit it on the head. I would say the gambling now, both gambling that the NFL promotes and the Las Vegas type gambling is what's driving this. And then you take into account fantasy football. You think, well, it's fantasy football. But there's a lot of money on fantasy football as well. Remember the start of the season when the 49ers failed to say till the last minute that McCaffrey wasn't playing? There was a lot of money lost on fantasy football based on that. Okay, and they even did an investigation of that.
But I don't understand the gambling thing, though. Let's say a Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson does go out for half the season. Mm-hmm. Just adjust your spreads, right? And people still put money on it, right?
I agree.
Or do they think people would gamble less if that happens?
I don't know.
I don't understand that.
I don't know. Well, see, again, that's if
see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, I
guess they just figured it'd be less money if you have like two backups playing in week 15, right, or week 12.
Well, I don't think it'd be less money. If you had two backups playing, it may be a game that doesn't get a lot. But let's say, to answer your question, let's remember what we talked about with gambling, right? Why the line opens at one spot and then moves down is they want almost an equal amount of money to be put on both teams, right? And that's why they want to get the line to a point where there's as many people betting on the Chiefs as there are betting on the Eagles. Okay. So let's say Mahomes gets hurt and he can't play in the Super Bowl. Well, now the line's going to heavily favor the Philadelphia Eagles, correct?
Right.
Well, teams are not going to bet on it. You're going to have to make that line almost
adjust the line.
Yeah, but even then, the Chiefs you're not going to get people to buy into that because they look at it. They say, well, yeah, there's a 16-point line, but the Chiefs have Joe Bull playing quarterback, Carson Wentz.
Even if the Eagles are favored by 21 points, people are going to put money on the Chiefs?
They might, but I don't think it's going to be. I just don't think the psychology is going to be quite the same. I do want to say one thing before I forget it, though, is I want everybody listening to this pod. We talked about hits on quarterbacks and all this, and I'm going to say this and then make my statement based on it. I want everybody listening to this podcast to go to YouTube and pull up three different things. One, pull up Joe Turkey Jones, defensive lineman for the Cleveland Browns, and the hit that he put on Terry Bradshaw, where he actually picked him up and pile drived him into the turf head first. That's number one.
Did they throw a flag on that? I don't know.
No flag was thrown on that. Number two, I want you to go back and find the Giants and the 49ers in the NFC divisional playoffs in 1986 at Giant Stadium when Jim Burt hit Joe Montana, all right, and knocked him out of the game. Look at that one. And then the third one is the NFC Championship game in 1990 in San Francisco when Leonard Marshall hit Joe Montana and not only knocked him out of the game, but essentially ended his career. Those three plays. And no flags were thrown. But that's football. That's the way football should be played. Now, I will say, saying all that, I'll say, that's why people laugh at me, but I still stick to my guns. Joe Montana is the best quarterback of all time, not Tom Brady. Now, Tom Brady has achieved more Super Bowls, all right? He won 7 of them, but remember, he lost 3. Montana won 4, never lost 1, never threw an interception in the Super Bowl. But the point is, when you take that kind of abuse and every play, and they don't give you calls, it's a lot tougher to achieve what those guys.
On top of that, the pass interference calls. They didn't protect receivers like they protect them now. It was harder to move the ball down the field.
Yes, and Tom Brady.
It was easier to play defense back then.
Right, very much so. And Tom Brady's somewhat of a hypocrite because when he was calling that Eagles-Redskins game Sunday, he was talking about how the flags they threw on the court, those shouldn't be thrown. Well, he was the biggest complainer going for flags. Okay, so don't give me all that crap about that. But that's a whole other story. But so I think we've talked about that. So now let's talk about the game itself. Okay, Chiefs versus Eagles. As much as I hate to say it, I think the Chiefs are going to win this game. I don't see, take away all we've talked about, I still think the Chiefs have a better football team, even than the Bills, because I think the Chiefs have a good quarterback. They have great receiver options now, and they have two pretty powerful running backs, Pacheco and Kareem Hunt. Both running hard, both give you a change of pace. I just don't really see how the Eagles are going to be able to stop them. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the Chiefs are going to win. I mean, Eagles probably the better team on paper, I think, maybe. They have a talented receiving core. They have Barkley.
Mm-hmm.
Hurts, I'm not totally sold on him, but he can make a lot of things happen with his legs. He's playing well, whatever. Their defense is probably equal, if not better, to the Chiefs. Would you agree with that? I don't know. I do agree.
I would agree with that.
It's underrated, but
yeah, I would agree.
On paper, I feel like you might say it's evenly matched or give it to the Eagles. But just knowing what you know, if you're a fan of the NFL, you watch the Chiefs play every year, the last 5 years or whatever, they're just going to win. I mean, they just find a way to make it happen. Their coaching they have a big positive on the coaching side of things too. I think Andy Reid, much better coach than Sirianni, and all the position coaches probably better too. What's the D coordinator's name? The Chiefs.
Oh, Spagnuolo.
Yeah. So, you know that Kelsey's going to be like wide open in the middle of the field like 5 times, every quarter, and they're going to hit him. The Chiefs they know what it takes. They've been there countless times. They know what they have to do. Mm-hmm. They're just going to get it done.
They are. No, they are. I mean, and I think that.
And I think the officiating is going to favor them. Let's be honest.
Right. I agree. And I think the Eagles have some really good receivers, but Hurts. I think
he's not as prolific as Patrick as Mahomes.
So what the Chiefs are going to do is they're going to make sure they take away Barkley. Okay.
Yeah.
And they're going to force Hurts to beat him. And I don't think
they're going to pressure him.
And they're going to pressure him. And I don't think they're going to be able to do it. And the Chiefs. There's too many weapons. The Chiefs have too many weapons for the Eagles to stop them all. And then you throw into the fact that you got Mahomes that's able to scramble if he needs to. So, I think it's going to be the Chiefs. I think they're going to win by a touchdown. I'll just put that, touchdown.
I think they'll probably win by, I'll say 2 scores, or whether that's 10 points or 9 points or 11, whatever, 2 scores.
All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed this edition of the Press Box Podcast. A lot of good discussion. We'll be back after the Super Bowl to wrap the Super Bowl up, wrap up the NFL, talk a little bit about the NFL draft that'll be coming up in Green Bay. The draft will be in Green Bay, Wisconsin this year, which will be interesting. So we'll talk a little bit about that next time we join you on the Press Box Podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.